Okay, so picking up where we left off at the last video, natural killer cells kill our own body cells. They really are only useful against viruses, which invade our body cells, and cancer cells, which are our own body cells gone awry. They, for the most part, don't kill the pathogens themselves. The phagocytes do that. Now I'm going to actually jump ahead, not this slide, but the next one, which is the phagocytes, because I'd like to keep the cells together. I'll come back to inflammation in a sec. So phagocytes perform phagocytosis. They engulf things, in this case pathogens or cellular debris, foreign particles, proteins that don't belong, that kind of thing. The most important phagocytes are the neutrophils and the monocytes. They are both white blood cells, neutrophils being the most abundant ones, monocytes being the third most abundant ones. And the monocytes, when they undergo diapedesis, when they squeeze out and are into the interstitium, the monocytes become mobile and almost like amoeba, and are now called macrophages. So neutrophils, macrophages. So what gets them to the area is a process called chemotaxis, really being carried to a destination, taxi, by chemicals. They're attracted to the injured area. And the cells themselves that are injured are the ones that secrete the chemotactic chemicals. Neutrophils are not as large as the macrophages, so they eat smaller things, but nevertheless, that's what it's about. So the phagocytes and the natural killer cells are the cells. Now, inflammation is a very important process. Most lay people think of inflammation as a bad thing. You know, a lot of medical people think, oh, we have to get rid of the inflammation, we need anti-inflammatory drugs, etc. Inflammation tends to hurt and give symptoms, so people don't like it, but it's an important part of healing. It stops the spread of the pathogens, it limits infection, and it sets the stage for proper healing. I always tell a story about a party that my son had got out of hand. A fist got put through the drywall. The boys tried to cover it up by filling the hole with mud, but it didn't work very well. So when I fixed it later, I cut the drywall out, the hole and surrounding drywall, because what I wanted to do was get rid of, there's the hole, but then there's all the damaged drywall on the edge of the hole, maybe back a couple of inches. So you cut all of that away, you put a new piece in, you tape it, and you mud it, and you sand it, and the seam, the healing is invisible, and it's done properly. That's what inflammation is. You have to get back to good tissue. So you have to get rid of the dead tissue and then the damaged tissue all around the dead tissue. Get back to good tissue to promote that healing. So what happens during the inflammatory response? You get dilation of blood vessels, which then brings more blood to the area. And with the increased amount of blood, you get more white blood cells, and the blood is moving slower, so there's more time for margination. The white blood cells can stick and then undergo diapedesis. You get the clotting proteins that are necessary into the area and staying in the area. You're bringing more oxygen, more nutrients to speed healing, and all of that all happens because of inflammation. Now, most textbooks talk about 5 cardinal signs of inflammation. For some reason, yours decides to talk about 4, but the mnemonic is PRISH, P-R-I-S-H. P is pain. It's painful because the extra blood coming to the area creates pressure, and that pressure pushes on pain receptors, etc. And a lot of the inflammatory chemicals also irritate the pain receptors, and so you end up with pain from it. So things like prostaglandins and that cause pain. R is redness. It's red because there's more blood in the area. You have more vasodilation, so more blood. Blood is red. Redness. P-R-I. I is immobility. This one isn't on your list, but it's really important. What happens is by having swelling and joints not working properly because they're inflamed, it stops you from moving things around and creating a pressure that's going to drive the pathogens into general circulation. P-R-I-S. S is swelling. Swelling is there because there's more interstitial fluid, there's more liquid because of the vasodilation, because there's more blood in the area. Now, the swelling is important because it kind of walls off and holds the pathogens from going into general circulation. It also gives more room for the phagocytes to work because there's more room between cells because the interstitial fluid has gone up. And that, as we've already seen, that extra fluid gets taken up by the lymphatic system, by the lymphatic capillaries, which pulls all of these things into the lymphatics, which gets them to the lymph nodes where they can be dealt with more efficiently without infecting other tissues. So it's important. And H is heat. It's hot because blood is warmer and there's more blood, so therefore it feels hot. So P-R-I-S-H. Pain, redness, immobility, swelling, and heat. Okay, another process is fever. So fever is a systemic reaction. The whole body, it happens. So the body temperature is reset to a higher level. And what that does is it creates a hostile environment for the pathogens. It's because the pathogen is kind of designed to work at normal body temperatures. By raising it, it makes it less hospitable. The elevated temperature causes zinc and iron to be sequestered by the liver and spleen, and the pathogens need it for growth and metabolism. So you keep it from them and slow down their growth. Also, the phagocytes work better in the heat. The increased heat increases metabolic activity, and so the phagocytes are more vigorous, and healing happens a little faster with heat. So all of these things are good. So to go back to here, interferon and complement. So what interferon is the way a virus works is a virus, which is a bit of DNA or RNA surrounded by a protein coat. They have no facility to reproduce themselves. So what they do is they go inside a cell through various portals of entrance. The SARS virus here that's giving us COVID gets in through the ACE receptor, the angiotensin converting enzyme receptor that's on most cells. each virus has its own way of getting in cells, and so therefore will preferentially invade different types of cells depending on their receptors. But nevertheless, they get inside the cell. And once they get inside the cell, they use the transcription mechanisms of the cells and the DNA replication mechanisms to reproduce their RNA or their DNA, depending on which they have. And so they take over that transcription and they rewrite copies of themselves. And then they translate those that DNA or RNA at the ribosomes, and the cell, instead of making its normal proteins, will make the viral proteins. And then the viruses assemble within the cell. This is useful in a couple of things. One, it takes over the cell's function, but two, the viruses are safe from the phagocytes when they're in the cell, because the phagocytes only eat things that are in the interstitium. So what happens is the cell that's invaded can't make its own proteins to go on its surface, so it makes viral proteins to go on its surface, and that's how the natural killer cells recognize it as a problem, because it's not doing what it's supposed to. But what will happen is that cell will make viruses until it's full of virus, and then it will explode, and all the viruses will go into the interstitium. Macrophages will eat some, but viruses then will enter all the neighboring cells. So one of the defenses against that is that when a cell is making proteins that it's not supposed to make, when it's making viruses, it will release a chemical called interferon. And interferon will enter all the neighboring cells and turn off their transcription and translation functions. Their protein synthesis functions turn off. It makes those cells useless, and they will be lost forever to the body. They have to be killed and replaced, but it slows down the viral replication. So interferons interfere with viral replication in the neighboring cells. It's a way of slowing the spread of the infection down. Interferons interfere. Complement, on the other hand, is against cellular pathogens like bacteria and protozoan. So what happens with this is that there are proteins that are made by the body and they're secreted by the body. And when they hit a cell that's been targeted, and we'll talk about how it's targeted in the next video, it will insert this group of proteins into the cell membrane of the pathogen. Now, because the cell membrane is a fluid mosaic, then these proteins will all float together and they will join to one another, and they will basically make a ring, which is a hole in the cell membrane of the bacteria, the pathogen. And so they basically stab it, they poke a hole in it, and may kill it or at least severely disable it. So complement makes this, and we call it the membrane attack complex because it attacks the membrane. And it's a complex of a number of different complement proteins. Complement also has some other functions. One of the things that happens is that when complement proteins are activated, they cause the release of chemotactic chemicals and inflammatory chemicals. So they enhance inflammation, which brings more macrophages to the area and keeps the pathogen in place and blah, blah, blah. More complement protein, everything inflammation does. And that's an important thing. So it's useful in maintaining inflammation. And the last thing that it does is that it enhances the work of the phagocytes. If the macrophage has to surround a bacteria, grow pseudopods around it, and slowly engulf the bacteria will just swim away. It can get away. So the complement protein acts like a handle that the macrophage will grab hold of so that the bacteria can't get away while it's being engulfed. If a bouncer in a bar is going to punch you, he'll grab your shirt so that you can't get away from the punch. It's the same thing. Complement acts like the shirt. It's the handle that the phagocyte will grab hold of, and so it works very well with this. So these are the things of the non-specific innate immunity. Barriers, chemicals, complement and interferon, cells, natural killer cells and phagocytes, and processes, inflammation and fever. And this will happen almost no matter what the pathogen is or what the cellular damage is.